I was 38 weeks pregnant when I first saw him. It was a warm evening, the air thick with the scent of pine and the faint traces of gasoline from the highway that ran alongside our small trailer park community. My husband and I called it the Village, a cluster of trailers tucked between two dead-end streets, surrounded by dense forest. Everyone here was family. My aunt, uncle, and cousins lived in one trailer. My husband's brother and nieces were in another. My grandmother's house was just a short walk away on the next street over. It wasn't the kind of place where you worried about strangers. That night, my best friend Ree was visiting from college, and she had spent the night catching up with me. The next morning, we decided to take a long walk. I was huge, my belly stretching the fabric of my dress to its limit, and my back ached constantly. They say walking helps induce labor, and at that point, I was willing to try anything. We strolled down my street, then out onto the highway, past the small convenience store on the corner. It was peaceful, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, the occasional car whizzing by. Ree was talking about something funny that had happened in class when I saw it. A white truck. It wasn't speeding, like most vehicles did on this road, where the speed limit was 55. Instead, it crawled past us at maybe 30 miles per hour. As it approached, I glanced at the driver, a bald, middle-aged man, maybe in his 50s. He was rubbernecking, his head turning far too slowly as he watched us. A chill crawled up my spine. I turned to Ree. "That guy just went by really slow," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. She barely glanced up. "Huh? I didn't even notice." I tried to shake it off, but something about the way he had looked at us, like he was memorizing us, bothered me. We kept walking, nearing the store. Less than 2 minutes had passed when I saw him again. The same white truck. This time, he was coming from the opposite direction. My stomach clenched. "That's him again." Ree looked up, frowning. "Get in the grass," I said quickly. We hurried off the road, stepping down the grassy slope toward a row of houses. We weren't in the middle of nowhere. This section of the highway had houses on both sides, even if they were spaced out. The truck rolled past us again, slow and deliberate. I didn't look directly at it this time, but I could feel his eyes on me. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see behind us. He was slowing down. Then, in the distance, he turned into a driveway and started turning around. My pulse jumped. "Run," I whispered. Ree didn't question me. We took off as fast as we could. It wasn't easy for me, being so pregnant. My feet pounded against the pavement, my breath coming out in ragged gasps. We thought about heading into the store, but it was empty most of the time, and the cashier wouldn't be much help if the man tried something. Instead, we ran toward my grandmother's house. The hill leading up to her street felt steeper than usual, my legs burning with effort. When we finally reached her front door, I risked one last look over my shoulder. The white truck had pulled into the store's parking lot. He was waiting. We burst into the house, gasping for breath. My grandmother and aunt were sitting at the kitchen table, sipping their morning coffee. I told them everything. My aunt's face darkened. "We're calling the police." I hesitated. But what if I'm just being paranoid? What if it was someone we know, just trying to say hi? My grandmother shook her head. "Honey, you trust your gut. And if he was someone we know, why didn't he wave? Why didn't he say anything?" I swallowed. She was right. The police came, took a report, and left. There wasn't much they could do. After all, no crime had been committed. But as the weeks went by, more stories began to surface. People had seen the white truck before. A woman in the next trailer park over-reported that a man had emerged from the woods near her home, trying to lure her young daughter toward him. She screamed for her mother, and the man fled. And then it got worse. One afternoon, when I wasn't home, a few of my younger cousins were playing outside. They ranged in age from 10 to 15. The white truck rolled down our quiet street. It passed them slowly, circled to the dead end, then came back up. This time it stopped. The driver leaned out the window, smiling. He spoke softly, trying to coax my 11-year-old cousin closer. My cousin hesitated. Then, realizing something was wrong, he took a step back. The moment he refused, the man's expression changed. His friendly smile twisted into something darker. The kids ran. They bolted back to my aunt's house, slamming the door shut behind them. When we heard what had happened, we gathered all the children and warned them, never go near that truck. A few weeks later, I gave birth. I was home with my husband, our newborn baby asleep in his crib, when my aunt called. Her voice was tense. "He was here," she whispered. My stomach dropped. "What?" "He was here," at Grandma's house. My teenage cousins had been in their bedroom when one of them decided to open the blinds. And there he was, the man in the white truck, squatting on top of the AC unit outside their window, just staring at them. They screamed. He jumped down and bolted into the woods. My aunt called the police immediately. My husband grabbed his gun, along with a few of his friends, and went into the woods with flashlights. They didn't find him. He had vanished into the night. After that, we were certain he wasn't just passing through. He had been watching us, studying us. He knew our schedules, knew when we were home, when we weren't. The police increased patrols in the area, but nothing ever came of it. Eventually, the sightings stopped, but I never stopped thinking about him. Was he from out of town? Or was he someone local, someone we might have passed in the grocery store without realizing? I don't know, and I pray I never find out. I was 25 when it happened. At the time, I was working at a rundown seafood restaurant on a lake, way out in the middle of nowhere. The nearest store was 15 miles away, and most of the customers who came in were either locals or people passing through on fishing trips. It wasn't the kind of place you stopped at unless you had a reason to be there. The clientele were interesting, to say the least. A lot of rough-looking guys, truckers, and groups from the nearby trailer parks and campgrounds who would stay for months at a time. I was used to drunks, creepy comments, and the occasional customer who didn't know how to take no for an answer. But that night, something was different. It was a slow evening, the air thick with the smell of fried fish and stale beer. I had already cleaned off most of the empty tables, ready to clock out as soon as the last few stragglers finished up. Then the doors swung open, and two men walked in. The moment I saw them, something in my gut twisted. One was older, probably in his late 50s, with a rough, sun-weathered face and stringy gray hair. His clothes were stained, and he moved with a slow, deliberate heaviness, like every step was meant to assert some kind of authority. The other man was younger, maybe late 20s or early 30s, but just as rough-looking dirty jeans, a torn hoodie, and eyes that never stayed in one place for too long. They didn't look like they belonged together, but there was something about the way the younger one hovered slightly behind the older man, watching him, waiting for cues, that made me think otherwise. I greeted them with my usual fake customer service smile and led them to a booth by the window. As I handed them menus, I felt the older man's eyes settle on me. I had been stared at before. This was different. It wasn't just that he was looking at me, it was how he was looking through me. Like I wasn't a person. Like I was something he had already claimed. A slow, creeping nausea rolled through my stomach. I took their drink orders, 2 Coronas, and hurried back to the bar, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I returned with their beers, the older man grinned at me. "You're real pretty. You know that?" I forced a polite chuckle. "Thanks." He didn't stop smiling. "Bet you got a boyfriend, huh?" "Yeah," I lied. "Been with him for a while." The younger guy snorted under his breath, shaking his head. The older one just kept staring. "You sure about that?" That made me pause. Yeah, pretty sure." He laughed. "Shame. I decided I had heard enough. Y'all need another minute to decide on food?" They ordered. I walked away as fast as I could. As soon as I hit the kitchen, I grabbed my manager. "There are 2 guys out there," I whispered. "They're making me really uncomfortable." He frowned. "What are they doing?" "Just staring. Saying weird shit. I don't know. I just have a bad feeling." My manager nodded and stepped out to take a look. A few seconds later, he came back, his expression dark. "Their van is the only car in the parking lot," he muttered. "Creepy-ass white utility van. No back windows. Dirty as hell." I swallowed hard. "Be careful," he warned. "Don't go outside alone." My skin prickled. I had seen vans like that before. I had heard about vans like that before. For the rest of their meal, I kept my distance, only checking on them when absolutely necessary. I stayed near my manager, always making sure I had a clear path to the kitchen. They ordered more drinks. The more they drank, the worse it got. The older man got bolder. "You ever been with an older guy?" he asked, his voice thick with beer. I ignored him. "You got soft hands," he continued, his lips curling into a smile. "Bet you'd feel real nice." The younger guy snickered, keeping his eyes down. I swallowed my disgust. "Can I get y'all anything else?" The older man leaned forward, tilting his head like he was thinking. Then he grinned. "If you aren't going to give me anything, then you should go into the kitchen and get a hot dog bun. Fill it with mayonnaise and microwave it for a few seconds." I blinked. "What?" "So I got something warm and soft to stick my dick in tonight." My stomach turned. I don't even remember what I said. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just turned and walked away. But my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my notepad. My manager saw my face and didn't even ask questions. He just went to the doorway and stood there, arms crossed, staring them down. When I brought them their check, they paid in cash. The older man looked up at me one last time, his grin slightly less playful now. "You be careful out there, sweetheart." Then they left. I didn't breathe until the van had pulled out of the parking lot. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't really gone. I kept glancing out the windows, half expecting to see that dirty white van idling by the tree lean, headlights off, just waiting. 3 days later, I saw it again. Not at the restaurant. At the school bus stop down the road. I was driving home when I spotted it, creeping slowly along the curb, just like it had done outside the restaurant. There were kids there. I watched as the van slowed down, the driver's window rolling down slightly. I couldn't see inside, but I didn't need to. One of the kids, a little girl, maybe 9 or 10, took a step back. I yanked my wheel to the side and pulled over, rolling my window down. "Hey," I shouted. "You need something?" The van hesitated. Then, slowly, it pulled away and disappeared down the street. I sat there for a long time, watching until I was sure it was really gone. When I finally drove home, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep my grip on the wheel. I never saw the van again after that. But sometimes, even now, when I'm out late at night, I get this horrible feeling in my gut, like I'm being watched. And in my head, I still hear that man's voice. "You be careful out there, sweetheart." I was 10 years old the day a stranger tried to talk to me. At the time, I lived in a quiet little town in Florida, the kind of place where kids still played outside without much worry. It wasn't a big city, but it wasn't rural either. A mix of old trailer parks, small churches, and mom-and-pop stores where everyone knew each other's names. My grandmother had just driven her motorhome down from Alaska to visit us, and she had brought her beagle, Ginger, along for the trip. I was obsessed with that dog. She had long floppy ears and a tail that never stopped wagging, always sniffing everything in sight. That afternoon, I was taking Ginger for a walk. My house sat near a main road, and just a little further down was a small church with a horseshoe-shaped driveway. It wasn't anything special, just a simple white building with a wooden cross above the entrance, surrounded by a few trees. Ginger was being stubborn, stopping every few feet to bury her nose in the grass. I sighed, tugging gently on the leash. "Come on, girl, let's go." She ignored me, too busy sniffing a patch of bushes near the church driveway. That's when I heard the engine. A white pickup truck with a small trailer attached pulled into the church lot and rolled to a stop. The door swung open. I glanced up, expecting to see someone unloading supplies for the church or dropping something off. Instead, a man stepped out. He was tall, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s, with tan skin and dark hair. His clothes were dusty, like he had been working outside all day. He didn't look homeless, but he didn't look clean either. Then I noticed the girl sitting in the passenger seat. She looked about my age, maybe a year or two younger. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them, her long dark hair hanging over her face. Something about her body language made me uneasy. She wasn't moving, wasn't looking around. She was just staring at her lap. The man called out to me, "Hey there." I looked up, suddenly very aware of how empty the street was. I hesitated before answering. "Hi." He smiled. "I'm not going to hurt you." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. He had spoken too fast, too insistently, like he knew I should be afraid. He took a step toward me. I was wondering, "Do you know anybody that's selling babies?" For a second, I thought I had misheard him. "What?" He repeated himself, still smiling. "Do you know anybody that's selling babies?" I froze. My brain struggled to process what he was asking. Selling babies? Was he joking? Did I hear him wrong? I glanced at the girl in the truck again. She still hadn't moved. Her arms were wrapped even tighter around herself. I didn't know what to do. I was just a kid. I had never been in a situation like this before. My parents had always told me not to talk to strangers, but what was I supposed to do now? Run? Scream? Lie? I needed to lie. I cleared my throat. No, sorry." Ginger, oblivious to the situation, finally finished sniffing and gave the leash a tug. I took that as my cue to leave. "Gotta go," I mumbled, turning away. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't say anything else. I forced myself to walk, not run, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel his eyes on my back, watching me, waiting. Finally, I reached the other side of the road. Only then did I allow myself to glance over my shoulder. The man was still standing by his truck, hands on his hips. The girl in the passenger seat was staring straight ahead. I didn't stop walking until I was home. The moment I stepped inside, I ran straight to my mom and grandma. There was a man, I blurted out, still out of breath. He stopped at the church and asked me something weird. My mom looked up from the sink, frowning. What do you mean weird? I hesitated, suddenly feeling silly. What if I had imagined it? What if it was just some weird joke I didn't understand? But then I saw my grandmother's face. She had gone pale. What did he ask you? She said softly. I swallowed. He asked if I knew anybody selling babies. My mom turned off the faucet. Silence stretched between us. Then my grandmother grabbed the phone. She called the police, her voice shaking as she repeated my story. I sat on the couch, hugging my knees, while my mom asked me more questions. What did he look like? What kind of truck was it? What did the little girl look like? I answered the best I could, but I realized how little I had actually noticed. I didn't know the truck's make or model. I hadn't seen the license plate. I couldn't even describe the man's face beyond dark hair, kinda dirty. The only thing I could remember clearly was the girl. The way she had curled into herself. The way she hadn't looked at me. Like she wasn't allowed to. The police came by later that evening. They asked me more questions, took down a description, and told my mom they'd keep an eye out. But there wasn't much they could do. We'll do a patrol, one officer said. But without a plate number or a better description, it'll be hard to track him down. I felt sick. For weeks after that, every time I stepped outside, I scanned the roads, half expecting to see that white truck again. It never came back. Years passed. I moved away, grew up, and mostly forgot about that day. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that little girl in the passenger seat. Who was she? Why was she with him? And did she ever make it out? I was 22 when I unknowingly spent the night in a serial killer's home. At the time, I was living in a small Louisiana town, working construction with my cousin. Our weeks revolved around hard labor and our weekends around getting wasted. There wasn't much else to do. That Friday night was no different. My cousin and I had plans to go drinking with a coworker of ours, Josh. We met up at his place before heading out, eager to blow off steam. The first bar we went to was packed, and the second was worse, so we just drove around, stopping wherever we could get a drink. By 1 in the morning, I was sloppy drunk. Josh and my cousin weren't much better, and at some point, we realized we had no idea how to get back to Josh's place. Louisiana at night is a maze of poorly lit streets and half-remembered landmarks, and we were too far gone to navigate properly. That's when we stumbled across another bar. It was small, a hole-in-the-wall type of place, tucked between a gas station and a pawn shop. From the outside, it didn't look any different from the dozens of other rundown bars we had been in. But the second we stepped inside, I realized something was off. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, and every conversation stopped as soon as we walked in. Men turned in their seats, looking us up and down. There were no women. The realization hit all at once. It was a gay bar. Josh, drunk as hell, just grinned. Whatever, man. Let's just grab a drink. My cousin and I exchanged glances, but shrugged. We were already here. So we ordered beers, keeping to ourselves, but it wasn't long before someone approached me. He was heavy-set, with thinning blonde hair and a round face. His eyes were small, pale blue, and when he smiled, it didn't quite reach them. He struck up a conversation, and I responded politely. I wasn't interested, but he seemed harmless enough. At first, as the bar emptied out, he made an offer. If you guys need a place to crash, he said, I live nearby. Got plenty of space. I hesitated. Josh, on the other hand, was all for it. Hell yeah, he said, slapping me on the back. Better than sleeping in the truck. My cousin looked unsure, but between the alcohol and exhaustion, we weren't in a position to argue. We followed the man to his trailer park. It was in the middle of nowhere, tucked away in the trees. The dirt road leading to it was uneven, full of deep potholes that made the truck bounce with every turn. Something about the isolation made my stomach churn. We pulled up to his trailer, a small, single-wide with peeling paint and a sagging porch. As soon as we stepped inside, I knew we had made a mistake. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the usual musty, stale beer stench I expected. It was something worse. Something rotting. Then, my eyes landed on the bulletin board. It took up nearly the entire wall. Dozens of Polaroids were pinned to it, each one featuring a different man. Beneath each photo was a note. Descriptions: white boy, tight ass, good smile. Rugged, strong build, shy. Drunk, easy to handle. My stomach flipped. I turned to my cousin. He was staring at the board, his face pale. Josh, still oblivious, was already kicking off his boots. The man noticed me looking. "Oh," he said, smiling. "Just a little something to remember my friends by." His voice was light, casual, like it was completely normal to have a goddamn catalog of men pinned to his wall. Something in me screamed to leave, but I played it cool. "You got a bathroom?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. He nodded toward the back. I needed a moment to think, to get my head straight. The bathroom was small, with a stained sink and a shower curtain that was too clean, like it had been replaced recently. The mirror was spotted with flecks of something. I gripped the sink, staring at myself. "Get out. Get out. Get out." I took a deep breath and stepped back into the living room. Josh was already dozing off on the couch. My cousin caught my eye. He knew. We needed to leave. The man noticed the shift in the air. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice still pleasant, but something had changed in his expression. His eyes were sharper now, less friendly. I forced a smile. "Nothing, man. Just remembered we gotta be up early for work." "Yeah," my cousin chimed in. "Boss'll kill us if we're late." Josh groaned from the couch. "Come on, man. Just sleep here." The man smiled again. "Yeah, you boys are welcome to stay." The way he said it, it wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge. I felt my pulse in my throat. "We'll be fine," I said quickly. "Thanks for the offer." I grabbed Josh's arm, shaking him. "Get up, man." He grumbled, but didn't argue. We made our way to the door. The man didn't stop us. Didn't argue. Just stood there, watching. His expression was unreadable. We got in the truck and pulled away. I didn't breathe until we were back on the highway. None of us spoke for a long time. Josh was still half asleep, oblivious. My cousin finally broke the silence. "You saw the pictures, right?" I nodded. He exhaled, rubbing his face. That was bad. We never spoke about it again. Years passed. I moved away. And then, one day, I saw his face on the news. His name was Ronald Dominique. A serial killer, convicted of murdering 23 men. Men he had lured back to his trailer. Men he had taken pictures of. Men who had never made it out alive. I felt my stomach drop. I thought about the bulletin board, the notes under the photos, how close we had come. To this day, I don't know why he let us go. Maybe he thought we were too many. Maybe he didn't like his odds with 3 of us. Maybe he was just waiting for a better opportunity. All I know is, I will never, ever ignore my gut feeling again. I grew up in a trailer park in California's Central Valley. It wasn't the worst place in the world, but it sure as hell wasn't the best. The park had originally been built as a retirement community, but over the years, the age requirement had been dropped, and all sorts of people started moving in. Some decent, some less than decent. For the most part, my mom and I kept to ourselves. My dad wasn't around, and we had moved in with my grandmother after she was diagnosed with cancer. After she passed, we just stayed. It was cheap, and we couldn't afford to leave. The trailer to our right cycled through different renters. One guy got arrested for throwing his girlfriend through a window, and another couple of guys only ever seemed to be around at night, growing weed in the back. But our neighbors on the left were different. Cindy and Neural. Cindy was tiny, with tattooed eyeliner and a raspy voice from too many years of smoking. She collected Precious Moments figurines and walked around without her fake teeth in, giving her a permanent, sunken smirk. Neural, short for Leonard, was a Vietnam vet, an engineer who had retired early and decided to spend his golden years working on motorcycles and drinking beer. He was surprisingly intelligent and had a kind of laid-back charm that made people listen when he spoke. For years, Neural was a good neighbor. He looked out for my mom and me, made sure nobody messed with us. But then he joined a motorcycle club. Not the casual kind, the outlaw kind. Cindy told my mom that he just wanted to ride with them, that he wasn't interested in the gang lifestyle, just the bikes. But the people he started bringing around, they weren't bikers. They were criminals, and they were watching me. At the time, I was in my late teens, and I had a routine. Every evening, before it got too hot, I went running around the park. The full loop was a mile, and I usually did 3 or 4 laps. The area was fenced in, gated, but that didn't make it safe. I carried pepper spray because loose dogs were a constant problem, but I had never run into anything too scary. Until the night I was chased. It started like any other run. I had my headphones in, music blasting, zoning out as I followed the usual path around the park. That night, as I rounded a corner, I saw them. 3 men on motorcycles. They were sitting in the middle of the road, engines off, just watching. I knew Nerl's bikes. None of these were his. Something about them made my stomach tighten. I could have turned around, taken the long way home, but I was tired. I had already run 4 miles in the 90-degree heat, and the detour would take me past an old man's trailer, the same one who liked to holler and whistle every time I ran by. So I kept going. As I approached, one of them revved his engine. The noise made me jump. Then another one shouted, "Hey!" I pretended I couldn't hear them over my music and gave a quick, dismissive wave. That was my second mistake. The moment they realized I wasn't stopping, one of them peeled out, tires screeching, and started coming after me. Panic shot through me like a lightning bolt. I sprinted. I had never run that fast in my life. The sound of his engine roared behind me, getting closer. I turned sharply, cutting through the yards between the trailers, vaulting over plastic lawn chairs and rusted-out bikes. The biker swerved, trying to follow, but his bike wasn't built for tight turns. He skidded, cursing loudly. I ran harder. My house was only a few trailers away. My chest burned, my legs screamed, but I pushed forward, forcing myself to reach the steps. I practically launched myself onto the porch, fumbling for the door handle. I got inside, slammed it shut, and locked it just as I heard the rumble of a bike stopping outside. Then, bang, the door shook. I choked on my breath. Another bang. Harder. My mom ran out of her bedroom, her face pale. "What the hell is that?" Before I could answer, she grabbed my arm and pulled me to the floor. "Get down. Don't look out the window." I curled up beside her in the hallway, my heart hammering in my chest. For 20 minutes, we just listened. No voices, no words, just that same, steady banging on the back door. Finally, it stopped. We stayed there, frozen, until we heard the distant roar of a motorcycle disappearing down the street. When we finally stood up, I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. Our back door, the flimsy one with the loose frame, was slightly open. Not wide enough for someone to get through, but wide enough that if they had pulled just a little harder. I don't want to think about it. We called the cops. They showed up an hour later. By then, the bikers were long gone. We gave a report, but nothing came of it. No cameras. No evidence. Just a teenage girl's word against a bunch of ghosts. 2 days later, Cindy came over, sobbing. "Nerl's been stabbed," she choked out. Apparently, he had gotten into a fight with a rival gang at a tattoo parlor a few blocks away. He had been stabbed in the stomach and was in the hospital. I wanted to feel bad for him. I really did. But all I could think about was that man on the bike. The one who had chased me. Who had banged on my door for 20 minutes straight. What would have happened if my mom wasn't home that night? What would have happened if the door had given way? For the next few weeks, more men on bikes showed up around the park, stationed on the corners, watching. Cindy insisted they were Nerl's guys, keeping an eye on things. But I didn't believe her. I stopped running alone after that. Hell, I stopped going outside alone. A year later, we moved across the country. Best decision we ever made. Sometimes, though, when I'm alone at night, I still hear the sound of that engine roaring toward me.